Hello, and welcome back to phase two of If I Had the Power to Time Travel, take over the Marvel Industries to avoid a bankruptcy for Marvel back in 1996. How would I remake the MCU? And again, this is phase two. My name is Sean Holmes. Now, it's been a while since I last posted for this project that I've been working on since phase one. I took a little bit of a break to enjoy a party and enjoy the New Year's. Congratulations to everyone who made it to the year 2026. I hope to enjoy this year as much as I did the last year. I hope you do too. Now, let's get down to business. When we last spoke, or when I last spoke, I had said that I was going to do my MCU of the Defenders, at least how I remake Defenders, Netflix's Defenders. I decided after thinking about it over the holidays between December and January of this year, 2026, that I don't think I want to change anything with what Netflix did with the Defenders. I enjoyed the Netflix Defenders show, which is now the MCU, and I wouldn't change much except I would probably add more Punisher, at least my version of Punisher, which I still think should be Steven Seagal, Hollywood actor Steven Seagal. All right, so we're going to move on to the next thing I would like to do, which is provide my MCU X Factor. You notice I didn't say X Men. X Factor is from X Men in the comic books. I sort of hinted at changing the title of X Men to X Factor when I did my MCU first X Men movie earlier. I had characters mention X Factor, so now I'm going to title this project X Factor. Well, the full title is X Factor versus the Kin and the Shi'ar Empire. That is going to be a movie that I'm proposing. Before we get started, I want to get some things out the way first. When I did season two of Wolverine versus the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and for that matter, season one of Wolverine versus Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., I didn't really touch upon Logan's amnesia issue, which was a thing in the comic books as well as the cartoon and movie adaptations. My apologies for that. I do see how it's important to the story, and from now going forward, I will discuss Logan's amnesia, or at least try to squeeze it in. If anybody out there has any suggestions of how I could have squeezed it in some of the projects I've already worked on, please place those comments down below in the comment section. So my apologies for not including amnesia. I will try to include it from now into the future regarding these projects that I'm working on. Number two, before we begin the project of X Factor versus the Ken and Shi'ar Empire, I want to make a change, a significant change that is part of the story that I'm going to discuss. And that is the suggestion I made that Marvel's Fal-El, Vel, hope I didn't butcher the name too much, should hand off, in my story, the quantum bands to Quasar, aka Wendell Vaughn. Wendell Vaughn is going to be included in the story that I'm about to discuss, but I don't want to do that. Do the Vial handoff. It was a bad idea. It's not something that's in the comic books. Instead, what I'm going to do is use the MCU's Aisha. I didn't mispronounce that name. She was the wielder in Disney's MCU of the quantum bands, which ends up in the hands of Kamala Khan. And if I remember correctly, Carol Danvers. My apologies if I spoiled that. If I spoiled a movie plot for some people who haven't seen the Marvels. Anyway, so I want to include Aisha as the original wielder of the quantum bands in my story, and how Wendell Vaughn, Quasar, will get his hands on it later. Lastly, I want to talk about what's going to be also included in this story that I'm going to be discussing, which is the Space Jammers. I'm going to touch upon the Space Jammers slightly, not a whole lot. And I realize that's not a thing in the MCU, but I'm going to make it a thing in my story. And they will be the group that leads to the Guardians of the Galaxy for this project that I'm discussing. Okay, now that that's out the way, let's get down to X Factor versus the Kin and the Shi'ar Empire. I'm going to start off with an intro, of course, by saying this story, X Factor versus the Kin and the Shi'ar Empire, addresses a threat that's not on Earth. It's in the stars. Professor X is forced to retrieve his original team for a mission igniting a war with the Shi'ar Empire and inducing a new cosmic hero. So this is the pitch that I'm giving and a short explanation for what this story is going to be about. Okay, so let's move on to chapter 1. I title Cosmic Prologue and Mansion Intrigue. I subtitle this Battle in Space. In this visual scene, we're in space, and there are three important people that we should focus on. They're the heroes in this teaser. One is Aisha, the quantum band wielder, Marvel, the nega band wielder, Kree captain of the Kree forces, and Ms. Marvel. They are essentially creating a barrier between opposing forces of the Kree trying to get past them to enter the jump points that attack Earth. They are trying to protect Earth. One of the Kree ships breaks through their barrier, and Aisha is forced to hitch a ride on it to stop it from attacking Earth. She disables the ship, causes it to blow up while it's in subspace and in the jump point. As a result, she gets thrust to Earth, even though she manages to save it from the Kree vessel that was trying to attack Earth, but she ends up in Earth's past. Now, if you're a little bit confused by what I just said, don't worry. I will continue to explain as time goes by. But when I say Earth past, it's my way of trying to draw some parallels between my story and the MCU version. I'm trying to figure out a way to get Kamala Khan birthed on Earth, and she's integral. Aisha is integral to that story, at least for my purposes. So when I say she got thrust into Earth's path, I'm saying when she exited the jump point through subspace and she blew up that ship, she accidentally ripped through time and ended up in some part of Earth's past, thereby enabling her to be the grandmother of Kamala Khan years into the future. So some time travel shenanigans is what I'm trying to use here. So take note that this teaser is designed basically to set up the stakes and the power of the quantum bands, which will be crucial later for future stories. Okay, so let's move on to the next subtitle, which is Wolverine's Fragment Memory and How He Became a Member of X Factor. So visually, we are going into the mind of Logan through Charles's powers. Charles is trying to fix Logan's mind because it's somewhat fragmented. He's got amnesia. So this is the point where I'm trying to address the amnesia issue. And we see in these flashbacks adamantium bonding being done by scientists, a Skrull, and a glimpse of Vindicator. Now, please take note that we're planting seeds for things like Weapon X, going back to Department H, comic book stories like Enemy of the States, and Wolverine origins and endings. A lot of subtitles that you would pick up from comics if you're a comic book reader. Also, it's not just about Wolverine. It's also about other characters like Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan, or Chris Powell, also known as Darkhawk. So let's move on to the next subtitle, which is X Factor reassembles. Visually, the original team comes back to the X Mansion. That is Cyclops, Jean, Angel, Blake, and Angelica. Returning to meet, of course, their professor. They also are introduced to Lalandra and Wolverine. We're at the mansion. And in this scene, we see the tension between Scott Summers and Logan over the love of their lives, Jean, which is something that's a thing in cartoons and comic books. Right? The rivalry between Scott Summers and Logan Howlett over Jean Grey. Alex Summers, Scott's brother, Havoc, and Hank McCoy, otherwise known as Beast, both stay in college and aren't in this and isn't in this second movie of the story. The replacements for them would be Storm and Logan, which I'll explain later. So let's move on to chapter 2. I titled The Calm Before the Storm, subtitled New Mutants and Unsuspected Guests. Visually, other guests arrive at the mansion. These people are Moira, Storm, and Banshee. Storm was with Moira, training with her. Moira, of course, brings in Banshee, who she has a relationship with. And as they come in, Lalandra, unsuspecting to everybody else, people don't realize this, but Lalandra, who's in a section of the house by herself, collapses from a psychic shock. The cause of that, we don't know, but will become clear later. She's able to essentially pick up on threats to her life psychically. So that's why she collapses. I'll explain what those threats are. Hold on. Moments later, other mutants arrived at the house. These are going to be the students that Xavier is going to train to not replace, essentially, but continue in helping mutant and mankind work together. These younger students are Colossus, Magic, Karma, Mirage, Sunspot, Wolfsbane, Dazzler, Boom Boom, Armor, Spike, Negasonic, and Jubilee. Note, the looming threat targeting Laundra is the main focus, not these students that are coming in. Okay, so let's move on to the next subtitle, The Threats. Visually, the scene shifts away from the X Mansion to headquarters at SHIELD facility. Gladiator and his Darkhawks that are under his command, and these are not Darkhawks with a conscience. They're basically conscienceless. They're more robotic in nature, and they're following Gladiator's commands. They all attack a SHIELD headquarters to retrieve Eric the Red, who's in prison at the SHIELD headquarters. Once they free Eric the Red tells them what they want to know, which is the location of Lalandra, which he points to Xavier's mansion, and then they flee that area. Abigail Brand, who survives the attack at SHIELD headquarters, gets her phone out of her jacket and contacts Coulson. So now we move on to chapter 3. I titled Secrets, Lies, and Assaults. Subtitled Coulson's Warnings and Lalandra's Confession. Visually, there's a tense call in Xavier's mansion where Xavier's in his office, and when he picks up the phone, it's Coulson. He has a little short conversation with Coulson about the attack, and Coulson tells Xavier that he suspects this attack has to do with Lalandra, and Lalandra's hiding something from them. It's at that moment that Lalandra walks into Xavier's office to reveal something that she didn't tell him. Lalandra reveals that she stole a fragment from her brother, a very important fragment, a piece of an object that's very, very important. This object is the M-Cron crystal. Now, for those of you who don't know what the M-Cron crystal is because they never read the comic books or seen the 90s cartoon, it's essentially an object of great power. It's capable of swallowing up the universe whole, including planets and stars, and the person who wields the object basically becomes an all-powerful being inside of the object. Take note that this isn't just a personal exile of Lalandra. It's a heist that could start an intergalactic war. So let's move on to the next subtitle, which is The Mansion Under Siege. Visually, moments later, we see Gladiator's assault with the help of the Dark Arts on the X Mansion. The mansion's defenses and guards activate. X Factor, Storm, protects Charles and Alondra and suggests to them that we should split up, take different routes. The children should go one direction while Charles and Alondra and a group of the X Factor team go another direction. They take secret tunnels and they begin slowly exiting out the X Mansion underneath and underground, unsuspected to the people above the surface, which is Gladiator and the Dark Arcs. Uh, these tunnels lead them to the main street areas miles away from the mansion. So let's move on to chapter 4. Quasar rises and the mission begins. I subtitle this Quasar, You Are Go. Visually, we see Wendell Vaughn. He's with his fellow SHIELD agents. Coulson tells Agent Wendell Vaughn, You're a go. And that means Wendell Vaughn can now put on his quantum bands. The agents come to the aids of the X Factor team, Charles and Alondra, and the group that's with them. And Wendell Vaughn enters the battle that is taking place between Gladiator, the X Factor, and the Dark Arcs, which isn't going well for the X Factor. When Wendell Vaughn activates the band and enters the battle to protect X Factor, he turns the tide against Gladiator and his team. Gladiator flies off, but not before taking Alondra captive. Please take note that this is my origin for Quasar, combining elements from the comics and the MCU's Captain Marvel lore. So let's move on to the next subtitle, which is The Crystal's Whereabouts. Visually, Gladiator escapes with Alondra. Coulson interrogates Xavier, who secretly knows the crystal's location. Note, Charles is playing 4D chess, keeping the crystal from both S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Shi'ar while trying to save Alondra. Let's move on to the next subtitle, To the Stars. X Factor, moments later, finds Alondra's ship. Abigail has been following X Factor, confronts them. But being that Abigail Brandon is a mutant, Charles uses his psychic powers to communicate with her to tell her to stand down and come with them as they try to free Alondra and save the universe from the threat that's opposed upon them, which is the Ken, and his ambitions to take the Crown Crystal to rule the galaxy. The team X Factor launches into space using Alondra's ship so they can track down Gladiator, who took Alondra into space, and get her back. The mansion and the battle that took place near the mansion is just basically the Act 1 setup. The real adventure begins as the ship enters into the jump point and follows its programming into Space Jammer section of space where they're at. So the ship is following a pre-programmed set of programs, even though the X Factor thinks it's taking them to Alondra, it's actually taking them to the Space Jammers, which is who they're meeting up with. Meanwhile, Quasar is following the ship on Coulson's command to try and get the piece of the crystal they now have in their possession. So Xavier has the crystal because Alondra left it in the ship. Alondra is in the custody of Gladiator, who's already heading back to the Ken with her. And Xavier thinks he's heading to save Alondra, but he's actually heading into Space Jammer territory, which we'll find out how that all ends in the next story next time when I post another video on this subject. So the end for this part of the story. Tune in next time for the video regarding this subject. Now I want to take some time to talk about the real MCU and the upcoming Doomsday movie that's coming out. I want to say two things about that upcoming movie, or at least mention two people that I would like to see a part of that Doomsday movie, which probably will never happen because sometimes I don't always get what I want. Okay, the first person I want to see in that movie is Hollywood actor Josh Brolin, but not as Thanos like he once was in the MCU. I want him to be Cable like he was for the Fox stories of Deadpool. I like him to reprise his role as Cable. Although it would be a nice surprise to see him play Marvel's X-Man. However, that character might be too OP for the MCU, which means overpowered. So I will settle for Cable. And the final person I'd like to see in MCU's Doomsday in Reality is Negasonic Teenage Warhead. I hope to see her in the MCU in this Doomsday movie. It's supposed to be coming out during the summertime. That's it for now. Tune in next time for my MCU Iron Man 2 and how I would create Iron Man 2. This is Sean Holmes. See you next time.